Greetings. We welcome you again to the To Be and Do podcast that's part of the Belonging Exchange. And we're continuing our conversations with Bishop Ken Carter. Um, and Ken, I'd like for you to explain to me why you weren't offended by someone calling you Bubba after you had been elected bishop. I just, not, I don't know many bishops that would see that as a compliment.
Well, thank you, Phil. Well, that came from a friend, Will Campbell,
Yep.
and any of your listeners who know Will Campbell, you you know he was an old gadfly, and if you're familiar with the cartoon strip Kudzu, uh, Reverend Will Be Done, that's Will Campbell. Well, I met Will Campbell while visiting the prisons many years ago. But he became a friend. His book Brother to a Dragonfly was a bestseller, uh, and really a very formative book. He grew up in Mississippi, in poverty in Mississippi, but became very active in the civil rights era. And it originated. Should I tell the story of where he called me Bubba?
Yeah, do that. Do that.
Well, he's from Mississippi, and I was in Tennessee, and he lives in Tennessee. Well, he lived. He's deceased now, but he came to the going away service and reception when I was leaving Nashville to go to Jackson, Mississippi, as the bishop, and Will came to the service, and Will was sitting in the back of the room during the reception when they had an open mic time, and so they gave people the privilege or the opportunity to come up to the mic and say anything they wanted to say. Well, I saw Will get up, and to be honest with you, I got a little anxious because as he tottered up to the microphone at that time in his sort of exaggerated infirmity, because he always carried either an umbrella or a cane. And he tottered up to the microphone and he said, "Well, I'm a Baptist. Baptists don't have much use for bishops. But Carter, he's the first bishop I've ever felt comfortable calling Bubba. Now, now he's going to the land of Bubbas. 40 years ago, they ran me out of Mississippi. I knew this day would come. Just consider Carter's assignment to Mississippi Campbell's revenge." And he tottered back to his seat. He did, you know. Well, a reporter actually came up to me later after he said, "This was a good evening for you, but I'm curious about that guy that called you Bubba. Wasn't that rather disrespectful?" I said, "Are you kidding me? That's the highest compliment I received all night.
Yeah.
To be
Yeah.
called Bubba by Will Campbell." He didn't know who Will Campbell was. So I introduced him to Will Campbell. But it said to me, it helped me feel. Not only was it, I consider it a compliment because it said to me, you haven't lost your touch. You haven't lost your relationship with the working class, with the people who shaped you and formed you, the Bubbas of the world.
Right.
And Bubba, Will also, we could talk about Will a lot, but he had they have a lecture series now at Ole Miss, where he was the director of religious services when the first African American was admitted there, and he wrote he gave a lecture at Ole Miss entitled "Elvis as Redneck,"
Mm.
and he gave me a copy of that, a kind of a mimeograph copy of that speech. I think it appears in other forms now. I don't know if you've read it, but
No.
in which he makes the strong case that he was able to minister both to the KKK and be an advocate, and also join Martin Luther King and the efforts, and help to integrate. He was the one of the whites that accompanied the the children who were admitted in Little Rock. Desegregated the schools, and they literally did run him out of Mississippi. But it said to me, it was I felt it as a compliment, because it said, you haven't lost your no. I'm stumbling now, but you haven't lost your contact with your heritage, and it's okay to be Bubba and to be privileged.
Something that something that sort of goes along with that was one of my experiences with Will. And when we were in ministry in Core City neighborhood in Evansville, Indiana, the Klan organized around a dilemma there. There had been some rapes in the neighborhood, and the Klan was organizing and going to hold meetings. And someone said, "Well, we ought to call Will because he's had experience with the Klan." And I drew the short straw and ended up calling Will. And I'll not forget, I was maybe 2 minutes into the story asking for his advice, and he he cut me off and said, "What are their names?" And I thought he meant the people who had been suffered some tragedy, or people in our community, our little worshiping group. And he said, "No, no, no. What are the names of the Klan members?"
Yeah.
And I had to admit I didn't know.
Yes.
And that led to a whole other experience where actually one young man began to worship with us. And I'll tell that story as a heartwarm here in another time. But Will pushed us toward understanding we were no different than other Bubbas.
Well, and he illustrates what Peter Story had said about institutions doing our sinning for us in that lecture on Elvis as Redneck. He said that Elvis bridged the gap, helped to bridge the gap. He said he did more than most church folks did in bridging the gap between blacks and whites
Wow.
through his music. Um, and he says the term redneck is comparable to the N word.
Yeah.
It's the derogatory term toward the working class, and that's my heritage. The redness on the neck of the tenant farmers. And
Right.
he
From
said
working.
in
Yeah.
that lecture that that uh, those that Governor Barnett of Mississippi, uh, and he that what the work those in charge, the powerful, the privileged, use the Klan to do their work for them.
Right.
I think that was the point he was trying to make, and it reminds me too. He came to Duke back some uh, years ago, and a person who was present for this time, he'd been asked to come to the law school to speak, and he spoke to the law, and he was a law student, the one that told me the story. He said, I was there, and someone raised the question about his that was derogatory toward those the KKK, and I mean the people in the KKK. And Will Campbell just said it, and you know him, you knew him well enough to know he pulls no punches. uh, he said, "Well, there's not any more racism in the KKK than there is right here in this law school."
Good for him.
And you know, you look to and then he said, the people in the KKK, they don't have much power. They don't have any power, uh, but you do. You're going to be the ones that are going to be out there making the laws, enforcing the laws, deciding who's going to be charged. You're going to have power. You're the ones that got the racism uh, just by your attitude toward indicates to me you've got some work to do.
This for me, well, one of the things I noticed this morning as I was finishing your book, and it's way near the end of the book, and in the chapter where you discuss dementia and Linda's story and your lives, but you do at the end of many chapters you add takeaways or little points of
Right.
remembrance, and this one just sort of stayed in the air for me all the way until right now. You say Christian discipleship is being more than believing and doing. Well, as you know, we call this the Be and Do podcast. Um, it seems to me that what Will was challenging me to do was to be honest about who I am as a being,
Yes. Yes.
that I couldn't make up for, I couldn't do anything or believe anything that that was different from who God has created me to be.
Oh, I think that's so true, Phil. And I think you're right. That's what Will pushed us
Yeah,
to do that. But I learned that so much with my journey with Linda. Uh, Linda she was trained as a Christian educator. Uh, she forgot who Jesus was. She forgot the concept of God. Um, but it was her very being that that I miss. Uh,
right.
it wasn't what she did, what she thought. It was kind of like this pocket knife. It's the one to whom she belonged. She lost her capacities to think as we normally define thinking and cognition, but her very being um, drew something out of me and those who loved her and cared for her. And the essence, and that's one of the things I think we need to, some of the margins we need to shift, is the shift from simply intellectual conceptualization and abstractions to lived theology. We're called to be persons who embody love, and love, or 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 our very being is a participation in the being we call love. And I use the image of the triune God's dance of love. We're
Yeah,
called to participate in that dance, and it's no more a participation in the triune God's dance of love to receive love than it is to give it. And by receiving my love, Linda was still participating in that triune God's dance of love. And in so doing, she was drawing out of me a greater capacity to love without reciprocities.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. God's triune dance of love. We thank you, Bubba, Bishop Bishop Ken
Thank you.
Carter, for
And thank you,
sharing.
Bubba Phil.
Thank you. I'm honored, and we'll look forward to hearing from you a little more in the future. And to those of you who are subscribing, please go out and find one of Ken's books. Two have been mentioned here, but you'll be blessed by them. And Ken, I want to talk with you another time about community and institution life and that sort of thing. So let's plan on it.
Let's
God bless.
do.
Mhm.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be with you, Phil.